Welcome in, Friday edition, Outkick the coverage. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us. Hope you are ready for an exciting weekend of football. I know I am. I know John McClain is. He joins us now. He's at the Houston Chronicle. He has covered the NFL for a very long time. John, I know you cover the NFL, but I also know you're a big Baylor fan. How excited are you to have college football back in addition to what you've got rolling with the NFL?
Well, Baylor's had 5 openers canceled, going back to Ole Miss and the kickoff classic at RG Stadium in Houston. Now they play Kansas. I'll believe it when I see it. University of Houston just had another one canceled because of a COVID outbreak at North Texas University. So I'll believe it. I've been watching these other games, but as far as Baylor, when they finally play Kansas, I'll believe it when I see it.
All right, I want to start with you with the Houston Texans because obviously that is the team you know better than any, and you know a lot of teams well. But the Texans are sitting at 0-2. DeAndre Hopkins has not been there. Will Fuller's inability to stay healthy has continued to rear itself. What do you expect as the Texans get ready for a really challenging third week? Is this a must-win? What in this situation as the Texans currently stand would you say is your overall impression?
In August, I predicted the Texans to start 0-3. They're exactly where I expected them to be. And then they play Minnesota here, Jacksonville here. So it's not surprising to me at all. What is surprising is that the offense, which is working in 3 new players, receivers Brandon Cooks, receivers Randall Cobb, and running back David Johnson, who's also a big part of the receiving game, I thought it would be better quicker. And it's not. Defense has actually played, considering the defense has played Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. They've given up 4 touchdown passes, all inside the 10-yard line, to 2 quarterbacks who had 7 against them in 2 regular season games last year. So less was expected of the defense, so I'm not surprised. I think this one will be closer. I picked them to lose the first 2 by double digits. I picked them to lose this one by 7. So they're exactly where I thought they'd be.
With that in mind, the second half of the season becomes a lot easier. What have you seen in the AFC South, a division that I know you know really well? Do you believe that the Titans should be the favorite at this point in time? Is it their division to lose based on what you've seen, or do you still have faith in the Jags, the Texans, or potentially even the Colts, certainly, to make a run there? What do you see in the AFC South?
The Titans have struggled to win 2 games. I picked them to beat the rest and win the division. They're 2-0, but it's they can have
wobbly 2-0. Yeah.
Yes, and barely beat Denver thanks to some bad clock management by Vic Fangio, and then barely beat Jacksonville. Jaguars are the big surprise. Doug Marrone has control of personnel there for the first time, and he's gotten rid of players he didn't want. He wants players that are buying into what he's selling, and to me, they've been a huge surprise. We all thought they would be tanking for Trevor, and they're obviously not. The Colts, last week, Phillip Rivers didn't throw as much, didn't throw as many interceptions. The Colts beat the Vikings. Their defense has been really good, considering they played Jacksonville and Minnesota, which is off to a terrible start, and the Texans are 0-2. So I would say Tennessee with a 2-game lead on the toughest competition. I would think the Titans should still be favored.
What's going on in Minnesota? I mean, there are 3 teams that are 0-2 that made the playoffs last year. The Vikings are 0-2. We know that the Texans are 0-2. And then you also look at the additional 0-2 team and start to run through and say, hey, I don't really know what's going on with all of these 0-2 teams and trying to make sense of them. And one of the things that I would point to is obviously with the Texans and the Vikings, you have traded away your talent at wide receiver with Diggs and DeAndre Hopkins gone. But the 0-2 for the Eagles may be even more disappointing. Those 3 teams, playoff teams, which one has a better chance to make the season turn around? Do you think that all 3 are in trouble?
I don't think they're in trouble because I've learned in 44 years of covering the NFL, you can't base anything on 2 games. Titans were 2-4 last year, and they made the AFC Championship game. Baltimore was 4-5. 2 years ago, everybody wanted John Harbaugh fired. Now he's playing. They're the best, maybe the best team in the league, and he got a big extension. Remember 2 years ago when the Colts were like 1-5, 1-6, had to win in Nashville to make the playoffs, then beat the Texans in a playoff game. So it's not what you do in September and October, but November and December. That is a tried and true formula. But of those three teams, Philadelphia has a lot of injuries. Minnesota and Houston can't blame injuries. It's just the Eagles do. Carson Wentz has not played well. They've started 0-2. A lot of people picked them to win the NFC East. I did not. I picked Dallas to win the NFC East. Now they've got Joe Burrow and the Bengals coming to Lincoln Financial Field. If they were somehow to lose to a team that was the worst in the NFL with a rookie quarterback, the fans may tear down the stadium, but I fully expect them to bounce back and be 1-2. But of all those 0-2 teams out there, I think the Vikings, Texans, and Eagles have the best chance to bounce back.
We're talking to John McClain. You can follow him, read him at the Houston Chronicle. As he just said, he's been covering the NFL for 44 years. I don't think we've talked to you since the NFL season started. What has your experience been like covering the NFL, and how would you compare it to every other season you've covered the NFL? How strange does it feel to you?
It's the highest scoring first 2 games in NFL history, and also they've really dialed back on the penalties, especially holding calls. I think that's good. That's one reason they do have so many points. And also the injuries, the breakout of injuries, especially season-ending injuries, has been catastrophic already, especially for a team like the 49ers, 1-1, trying to get back to the Super Bowl. I didn't pick them to make the playoffs because usually teams that lose the Super Bowl have a bad hangover, Clay. But you go back to the lockout in 2011 when the players couldn't communicate with their team until right before the season when they had a short training camp. There were documented a lot of injuries that season, and I would imagine there's going to be a lot of injuries this season since players basically were working out on their own.
You, like I said, have covered the league for a long time. You ever see anything like the Tyrod Taylor story where he's getting a pain-killing injection effectively before the game, has a complication, loses his ability to play, loses his starting job for at least a couple of weeks? What are people around the league saying about this story?
Well, I know people have said that happens. I've never heard it happening, and never heard it happening before a game where a quarterback had to be rushed to the hospital, and then a backup, a rookie, despite a high first-round pick, who didn't have time to think of it, went out, played very well, took the defending Super Bowl champions to overtime. Now, Justin Herbert, knowing he's the starter this week, he's got a lot of time to think about it. If he plays well in this game, and I would think that there's a chance that he will based on what we saw. He plays one of the worst teams in the league in Carolina, that Tyrod Taylor won't get that job back. I know Anthony Lynn keeps saying he's the starter, but Taylor's a great guy, team guy, great. He could be a coach when his career's over, but the faster they go to Justin Herbert, the better off they're going to be. And hopefully it's not a serious thing that keeps somebody out a long time, but every time I think about players getting shots in their knees and their ribs, it makes me wince. And when I think they punctured his lung, that gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, no doubt. We're talking to John McClain of Houston Chronicle. Who would you say is winning the Brady and Belichick divorce so far? Obviously, the Bucs are 1-1. The Patriots are 1-1. How would you assess it?
Well, first of all, less was expected of the Patriots. They beat Miami. That's no big deal at home. What they did in losing to Seattle, going down to the last play on the one, that was more impressive to me. Withstanding 5 touchdown passes by Russell Wilson and almost having a chance to win on the last play, that was impressive. Tampa struggled to in a loss at the Superdome, which at the time I was impressed with the Saints, but after watching them against the in their loss at Las Vegas, that made me less confident in the Saints, who are my preseason Super Bowl team, over Baltimore. But the Buccaneers, they lose at New Orleans, and then they come back and they struggle to win the second game. And so I think they're a ways away from being totally in sync with so many new players. They've had injuries to their receivers. Evans and Chris Godwin, and that's got to affect Brady. It's pretty obvious Gronkowski is nowhere near physically the way he was before he retired last season. So I would imagine they're going to be a better team over the second half of the season than they are early in the season. So I would say Belichick has been more impressive than Brady, maybe Clay, because we just didn't expect as much from the Patriots. Not just because they lost Brady. They lost players in free agency. They lost players in the opt-out. And I don't think there was a team out there that lost more than they did. Now they go to Denver where the Broncos don't have Drew Lock, and they should win the second game in a row.
Yeah, what is going on, by the way, as you've covered John Elway for a long time, there seemed to be a lot of optimism about Drew Lock. He made some throws, didn't get helped out very much by Jerry Jeudy in the opening Monday Night Football game against the Titans, then gets injured. Based on the conversations you have with people, do you think that the Broncos are really convinced they've got something in Drew Lock?
Yes, they do. Now they've lost Cortland Sutton, their best receiver for the season. But, yes, they love Locke based on what he did over the second half of last season. And they were smart, didn't start him right away. Then when he played, he did well. So, yeah, they believe they do not need a quarterback.
Team that does need a quarterback potentially as we kind of run forward could be the Jets, right? Everybody was kind of excited about Sam Darnold. I think it's fair to say that the Jets have probably been the worst team in the NFL so far through 2 weeks. What are you hearing about New York, Adam Gase, and what the future of Sam Darnold and the Jets might be?
I believe that Sam Darnold, I watched him as a rookie play really well, show a lot of hope. I don't think Darnold is the problem. I think they've lost players. They've traded players. They've stockpiled draft choices. People around the NFL think Joe Douglas knows what he's doing based on him being one of the most highly respected personnel guys in the NFL for so long, who turned down chances to be a general manager till he got the right job. Now, I don't think unless they make some miraculous turnaround, Adam Gase will be there for a third year. So a new coach is going to come in with a quarterback, Sam Darnold, and a lot of high draft choices over the next couple of years. And you'd think it would be a good situation, but they've got to get the right guy.
We're talking to John McClain, Houston Chronicle. I know that there is a big rivalry between the cities of Houston and Dallas. If you don't live in Texas, you can probably give us a little bit of color on that rivalry. The Texans 0-2. The Cowboys narrowly avoided being 0-2. What are you hearing about what's going on down in Dallas?
Well, first of all, the rivalry is very one-sided. Cowboy fans up in North Texas don't even acknowledge that there is a Houston, and except sometime in baseball season. And the reason is the Cowboys have been so successful through the decades, and the Oilers and the Texans have not. Now, the Oilers won the first two AFL championships, so that's the last time Houston had a pro football team win a championship. So the people in Dallas, they know they were lucky to win that game. Not lucky because of a great comeback ignited by Dak Prescott with 450 yards and 3 touchdowns rushing, but that the hands team on the Falcons became the no-brains team and made one of the big special team blunders I've ever seen. So they know they're fortunate to be 1-1, and now they got to take on Russell Wilson on the road. That is a rough start for the Cowboys, and they should breathe a huge sigh of relief. And I actually feel bad for Dan Quinn because Dan's a good guy. Everybody likes him. To lose a game like that, Falcons are averaging 32 points a game, so you think, they could be 2-0 or 1-1, but they're 0-2 because they're giving up 39 points a game.
There aren't very many matchups of 2-0 versus 2-0 teams. One of them is going to be on Monday night, and everybody's going to be watching Chiefs-Ravens, but that's still a weekend away from actually taking place. One that may be a little bit under the radar is the Rams going up against the Bills. Both those teams undefeated. The Rams obviously went on all the way to the East Coast. I think they've stayed on the East Coast kind of to get ready. Nearly a toss-up style game. Who would you make as the favorite? What do you expect to see with the Rams going on the road again on the East Coast against the Bills?
Rams are much more impressive to beat Dallas, beat Philadelphia, the two teams from the NFC East. Now they're going over to the AFC East. They're playing it in Buffalo. The Bills are favored, as they should be. The Bills haven't beaten anybody. They've beaten the Jets and Dolphins. And so here they are. Josh Allen is off to a great start as a passer and a runner. He's been very impressive. But if the Bills beat the Rams, as they should be, to start 3-0, then I think they get a little more respect. Right now, based on the competition, people shouldn't get overly excited about the Bills. I would still take the Patriots based on what I've seen as the favorite in the AFC East.
I believe you. I want to circle back around to a question. We're talking to John McClain, Houston Chronicle. He's been covering the NFL for 44 years. You talked about kind of the big picture of the NFL. What about the nitty-gritty of your job? Have you ever seen anything like the way that the NFL experience is for a media member this year compared to any years in the past?
No, there's never been anything to it. I haven't interviewed a player in person since after the Texans blew a 24-point lead at Kansas City in the divisional round of the playoffs. All the interviews are in Zoom, and they will be this season. I went to training camp for 2 weeks, got tested every day. That was great because there were no fans and you could move anywhere where usually you're stuck in one spot. And now everything we do is on Zoom, and I don't like it, but it's the way of the world. When I went to Kansas City, there weren't nearly as many people in the press box. Everybody was spaced out. And then when I came to NRG Stadium Sunday, they had a fantastic job. They had everybody 6 feet apart. They had partitions. They had a big thing of sanitizer at their desk. They constantly made announcements about wearing your mask, socially distancing, and using your sanitizer. Food was distributed to us by workers. We couldn't get it ourselves. And I thought they did a tremendous job. I think the NFL, Clay, overall, had the time to look at the other sports and see what they were doing, and they spent millions per team to get the best that they could get, and it's worked. College football doesn't have the resources to spend $5 or $6 million per team to make sure everybody gets tested every day like they do in the NFL, and it certainly showed so far because of how few positive tests they've had.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And we're talking to John McClain, Houston Chronicle. One of the big discussion points of late on our show has been these NFL coaches are getting fined $100,000 for not wearing their mask correctly. Teams are getting fined $250,000. The players are not wearing masks. They're tackling each other on every play. They're shaking hands at the end of the game. Does it seem a little bit of a unnecessary, especially when you consider some of the guys getting fined, Deshaun Payton, John Gruden, have already had COVID, and so they aren't really protecting anybody from anything, in theory at least. Hopefully they wouldn't have that. Do you think the NFL might relax some of those mask requirements, or do you think this is something that will exist the whole season regardless?
This was explained by the NFL's medical expert yesterday. It was negotiated with the union, the protocols that are in place, and he talked about the possibility of false positives, false negatives are still out there. So he said people are required to wear them because that was the protocols agreed on by the league and the Players Association. And the owners could change it if they wanted to. Maybe some of them have been fined $250,000.
Might consider it. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw one recommendation that instead of fining him $100,000, give him a 15-yard penalty, and you'll never see him without a mask again. And I feel bad for the coaches because when as Bill O'Brien said, and he's worn one all the time, he said sometimes what you're saying gets muffled, and it could be when you're talking on the headset to people in the coach's booth. It could be when you're trying to make a point with an official or a player. I can imagine how bad it would be if the stadiums were sold out and you got to scream constantly to be heard. But it is very difficult and cumbersome for these coaches, but the owners and Players Association could change it if they wanted to.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know if you've been out in a restaurant yet, John, but when a waitress comes to you or a waiter comes to you with a mask on, I talked about this over the weekend, and I talked about it on my show. I took my kids out to Buffalo Wild Wings. They wanted to watch all the different NFL games going on, and they like to do that sometimes. So we were out Sunday, and, there's a lot of people watching the games. The sound's turned up. The kids are loud. And several different times, I couldn't hear what the waitress was saying, and so she had to pull down her mask and talk to me that way, right? That's obviously not that significant in the grand scheme of things because, maybe they get the wrong wing flavor, maybe they, going back and forth, not being able to hear very well. But the ability to make a clear call when you're wearing a headset is a big deal. The ability to correct a player or talk to an official, it seems to me that the mask can very much be a hindrance in terms of being able to coach. So I understand the desire for protection, but when you're being tested every day and when the players themselves aren't covered and they are tackling players, a part of me feels like it's a little bit ridiculous to have them in masks. And by the way, we put up a poll and 40,000 people voted in my Twitter poll. And I'm not saying my audience is a perfect reflection of the American audience for sure, but 93% of my audience didn't think it made sense to require coaches to be in masks.
Well, if the NFL thinks at this point, and they've done a great job, that it reduces the chance of COVID-19, then I got no problem with it. And maybe some of these guys are better off wearing masks so they can't be heard based on some of the decisions we've seen through the years with coaches.
No doubt. John, I always appreciate the time. Any television or movie tips you want to give us on the way out? Anything you've been watching lately that you like?
Well, I haven't watched many movies, Clay, but I've been watching a lot of British mysteries. And one that I watched 2 weeks ago called Vanderwalk is one of the best written, best acted. It takes place in Amsterdam. I love seeing shows shot in Europe where you get to see a lot of that city's Vanderwalk on I think it's the Oxygen Channel. I think it's now one of my all-time favorite shows. It's a police procedural, and characters, the writing, the acting, and the scenery are outstanding.
Outstanding stuff as always. I appreciate the time, John McClain. We'll be reading and watching as always. Thank you, my man.
Clay, thank you very much, and stay safe.
Will do. That's John McClain, Houston Chronicle. He's been there 44 years.